The next time you're at the pharmacy picking up a prescription, maybe just pause for a second. Consider this. What unseen forces are really dictating that price tag?
Right. It's not always obvious.
Not at all. And today, we're plunging into a system that, well, it operates largely behind the scenes.
And our source material here is really interesting. It's a YouTube discussion featuring Mark Thompson and Mike Papantonio.
Yeah, Papantonio, he's an author, but also a lawyer. Decades of experience battling pharmaceutical giants.
And based on their conversation, it's a system just, ripe with surprises.
Absolutely. What's fascinating, I think, is how their discussion really shines a light on the role of these pharmacy benefit managers. PBMs, they call them.
PBMs, right. These entities, they sort of position themselves as these crucial middlemen, don't they?
Exactly. Intermediaries in the flow of pharmaceuticals, sitting between the manufacturers, the pharmacies, and, well, your insurance.
But the picture that really emerges from their talk, it reveals this complex web. And there are significant transparency issues.
Transparency issues that directly inflate the cost of your medications. Seems pretty clear. So our deep dive today, it's got a clear mission, really.
Okay.
We want to unpack the intricacies of these PBMs, drawing directly from the insights shared in that YouTube discussion.
So not just what they are, but how they work.
Exactly. How they function, and crucially, why the price of prescription drugs in the United States just dwarfs the cost in other developed nations.
It's a huge difference.
It really is. Think of this as maybe your shortcut to understanding a critical issue that honestly touches almost every single one of us.
Yeah, definitely. And to really get the perspective Mike Papantonio brings, you kind of have to understand his background.
Right. He's not just some author who happened upon this.
No, not at all. He's a lawyer with this formidable track record, some of the biggest legal battles of our time.
Like what kind of cases?
Well, his firm was apparently instrumental in the first tobacco litigation, the national opioid crisis cases, actions against human trafficking, and get this, 87 of the largest pharmaceutical cases in the country.
87. That's staggering. That's a lot of firsthand experience dealing with the pharma industry.
Exactly. And it's this deep dive, this immersion into these real-world battles that really fuels his fiction writing.
Right. He's written several books, and the one that seems central to this PBM discussion is his novel, The Middleman.
Precisely. And his motivation for turning to fiction, that's also quite compelling.
What does he say about that?
Well, he basically articulates that, the public is often overwhelmed. People are juggling work, family, just daily life.
Yeah, not much time left over.
Right. Little time to dig into the complex details of these big issues. And he also points a finger somewhat at corporate media.
How so?
Suggesting there's a gap. That corporate media often fails to adequately explain these really serious topics to the average person.
Okay, so fiction becomes a vehicle.
Exactly. His hope, as he states it, is that by framing these critical issues within like an engaging, almost thriller-like story in The Middleman, he can grab people's attention.
Makes sense. Get them hooked.
Get them hooked, yeah. And then, ideally, that intrigue sparks their curiosity enough to maybe do their own research.
And he emphasizes that it's not all fiction, right?
No, he's very clear. A significant portion of the events, the situations in the book, are directly inspired by real things he witnessed through his legal work.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks then. Pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs.
Right. PBMs, Papantonio calls them legal fictions, which is a fascinating way to put it.
Legal fictions, what does that mean exactly?
Well, as he describes it, they were essentially created by the insurance and pharmaceutical industries. They position themselves as these essential go-betweens.
In the drug distribution chain.
Correct. Between the drug makers and the pharmacies where you actually pick up your medicine. But the core argument here, and it's a powerful one from the source, is that these PBMs are fundamentally unnecessary. He likely calls them legal fictions because they're these entities created within the system, but maybe without direct responsibility for making drugs or caring for patients,
Okay, unnecessary. He uses a really vivid analogy too, doesn't he? Something about mobsters.
He does. Compares them to mobsters offering protection.
Okay.
They essentially insert themselves into the flow of things, into the supply chain, and then they start dictating terms.
Dictating terms like, which drugs get covered?
Exactly. They have significant control over which drugs are on your insurance plan's formulary. That's the list of covered drugs.
Right.
And crucially, they heavily influence how much those drugs ultimately cost. It's like they've muscled their way in.
Muscled their way in.
Okay.
And how do they make their money? What are the financial mechanics?
This is key to understanding why costs go up. They negotiate things called rebates and administrative fees with the drug companies.
Rebates. Okay, that sounds straightforward enough.
Well, not quite. As Papantonio explains it, these aren't just simple negotiations. They function essentially like kickbacks.
Kickbacks, really?
That's the assertion. Drug companies pay these significant sums to the PBMs to make sure their drugs get placed favorably on those formularies.
So they pay to play, basically. To get on the list, insurance will cover.
That's the picture painted. And the crucial insight here is that these negotiated rebates, they often aren't passed down to consumers. That's part of the opacity.
So the PBM pockets the rebate, or a big chunk of it, instead of lowering the price for me at the counter.
That seems to be the implication. And those administrative fees are another layer, seemingly for services, but they add to PBM revenue and potentially hidden costs.
And the scale of this.
Yeah.
It's huge, right?
Oh, it's mind-boggling. Papantonio points out that just 3 PBM companies control something like $150 billion annually.
$150 billion. For 3 companies acting as middlemen.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Where is all that money going? What tangible benefit are patients actually getting?
Yeah, seriously. And the consequences. How does this PBM system actually affect people?
Well, as they outline it in the discussion, the consequences are far-reaching and deeply concerning.
Because the PBMs take such a big cut.
Potentially. Up to 40% of a drug's price, the source suggests, through these rebates and fees, that directly translates to higher costs.
For consumers and insurance companies both, I imagine.
Exactly. And this isn't just abstract economics, right? It has a very real, often devastating impact.
People choosing between medicine and food, that kind of thing.
Precisely. Individuals forced to make just incredibly difficult choices between affording life-saving meds and meeting other basic needs, rent, food, you name it.
So, okay, if these rebates are negotiated, why don't we see those savings at the pharmacy counter? Is it just the total lack of transparency?
That lack of transparency seems to be a huge part of the problem based on the discussion. It's hard to track where the money actually goes.
And it's truly infuriating when you look at the price differences. The U.S. versus other developed countries.
Oh, yeah. Insulin is the prime example they discuss. So many people rely on it.
What are the numbers again?
Here in the U.S., it can cost around $98, maybe more. In Australia, about $7. Canada, around $10.
$7 or $10 versus nearly $100. That's insane.
That kind of difference really puts the issue into sharp focus, doesn't it? It just highlights how different regulatory approaches like government price negotiation elsewhere impact cost.
And the argument Papantonio makes is that the U.S. is effectively subsidizing these lower costs abroad.
That's the claim. Because pharma companies need to recoup costs somewhere, and the U.S. system, with PBM influence, allows these inflated prices. Maybe we end up shouldering a disproportionate share of the global burden.
Okay, but what about R&D? You always hear the industry talk about the massive costs of research and development. That's the justification for high prices, isn't it?
It is. That's the standard defense. But the discussion brings up a really compelling counter-argument.
Which is?
That a significant majority, maybe around 70%, of new drugs actually originate from taxpayer-funded research. Taxpayer-funded, like at universities.
Exactly. Universities, public institutions. Yet the benefits, the profits from those discoveries, largely end up with the pharmaceutical companies through patents.
So we fund the initial research, and they get the patent and the profits.
That's the crux of the counter-argument presented. And the history of insulin itself is used as a powerful example.
How so?
Developed in Canada, the patent was given to Canadian universities for like $1?
$1? Why so cheap?
With the explicit goal of making it widely accessible. Today, the estimated production cost is apparently just a few dollars per vial.
And yet we pay.
Upwards of $98, sometimes even $275 in the U.S. And the PBM's role in keeping that price high seems, well, undeniable, according to the source.
Okay, so the system seems broken. What about fixing it? Are there potential pathways to change discussed?
They do touch on past political efforts. Apparently, the Trump administration had an agenda focused on lowering drug prices.
How?
Through government bidding. The idea was the government would directly negotiate prices with pharma companies.
Oh.
Okay, that sounds like what other countries do. What happened?
Well, what's interesting is the follow-up noted in the discussion that initiative was largely reversed by the Biden administration.
Roofed. Completely.
Mostly. Only allowed negotiation for a very limited number of drugs. Just 10.
10 drugs. Out of how many?
Exactly. It was characterized in the discussion as largely symbolic, more smoke and mirrors than real change.
Huh. And has Trump mentioned it again?
It seems so. He's apparently renewed his interest, specifically mentioning potentially eliminating PBMs altogether.
Eliminating them?
Yeah, as a strategy to significantly cut drug costs. Maybe by as much as 40%, the source suggests he claimed.
40%? That would be huge savings for people.
It would be substantial, but, and this is a big but raised in the conversation.
There's always a but.
Right. The major persistent obstacle, money in politics.
Lobbying.
Exactly. The pharmaceutical lobby makes significant campaign contributions to members of Congress across the political spectrum.
Even to politicians you might not expect.
According to Papantonio, yes. This financial influence apparently extends even to figures who, on the surface, might seem like strong advocates for lower drug prices.
Wow. That's pretty disheartening, actually. It just underscores how pervasive that influence is. Both sides of the aisle, potentially.
It seems that's the perspective offered. The discussion also brings up the role of whistleblowers.
People inside the companies who speak out.
Yeah, both in the fictional story of the middleman and in real-world pharma litigation. Papantonio states they're often absolutely critical.
How critical?
Involved in maybe 50 to 60% of the significant cases his firm handles. People with inside knowledge exposing wrongdoing.
Are there services that help find these people?
Apparently, yes. There are even specialized services that actively look for disgruntled employees within these industries who might have crucial inside information.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Uncovering the truth often relies on the courage of individuals risking everything.
Absolutely. But for the average person just struggling with high drug costs, pushing back against this huge, complex system, it feels impossible sometimes.
Yeah. What can one person really do?
And Papantonio acknowledges that frustration. He notes there aren't easy solutions.
So, no magic bullet.
Not according to him. He suggests things like, getting informed, writing letters to officials, letters to the editor.
Trying to exert some influence that way.
Potential ways, yes. But he also recognizes the immense scale of the problem. The path to meaningful change is tough, given Congress, given the money involved.
Did the conversation touch on any other political figures? Maybe potential reformers?
Briefly, yes.
Yeah.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was mentioned.
RFK Jr., what's the connection?
His past legal work with Papantonio on pharmaceutical cases, he's described as a true believer in the need for reform.
What kind of reforms does he advocate, according to the source?
Well, a strong stance on issues like eliminating direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising was mentioned.
Ah, the TV ads. And what about his views on other topics, like vaccines? That often comes up.
It does. The discussion briefly addressed the media portrayal of his vaccine views, characterizing them as wholly misunderstood and blown out of proportion.
So how is his position described in this context?
As being centered on the need for rigorous testing and caution before widespread public use, not wanting the public used as guinea pigs rather than a blanket anti-vaccine stance. That was the characterization given.
Okay, so if political change is hard, what other avenues are there for accountability?
Well, ultimately, the legal system, civil litigation. It's presented as this vital, often final means of holding powerful companies accountable.
When regulators and the media fail.
Exactly, when those other avenues prove insufficient. The argument is that big financial penalties from lawsuits are often the primary, maybe the only effective deterrent for these corporations.
And they mentioned regulators sometimes going to work for the companies they regulated.
Yeah, that example was given, highlighting potential and pretty significant conflicts of interest within the regulatory system itself.
It all sounds quite bleak in a way. You can understand why people get angry.
Oh, absolutely. The conversation concludes by addressing that directly. The understandable, intense public frustration when the system feels rigged.
Like it's unresponsive to ordinary people.
Right. And while Papantonio acknowledges the validity of that anger, he also emphasizes the fundamental importance of the rule of law.
Even if it's imperfect.
Even with its imperfections. Trusting the jury system, upholding the law as crucial elements of a functioning society. It's presented as the necessary alternative to, more extreme reactions or vigilantism.
Right. Keeping faith in the process, however flawed.
That seems to be the concluding thought on that front.
Okay. So to kind of wrap this all up, our deep dive into this YouTube discussion, it's really laid bare, a potentially deeply concerning picture of these pharmacy benefit managers.
These seemingly innocuous middlemen.
Exactly. Middlemen who actually wield significant, maybe undue control over the price of essential medications.
directly contributing to the fact that the U.S. pays dramatically more for drugs than pretty much anywhere else in the developed world.
Yeah. Which really leads us to the final thought for our listeners.
Okay.
Reflecting on everything we talked about today, the role of PBMs, the influence of pharma companies, the complexity of drug pricing, what fundamental changes do you, the listener, believe are truly necessary to create a more equitable, transparent, and ultimately more affordable pharmaceutical system here in the U.S.?
It's a really crucial question because it's such a multifaceted issue, isn't it? So many layers, deeply entrenched interests.
Definitely. And understanding these different perspectives, these underlying mechanisms we've discussed,
Yeah.
that feels like the very first step towards even thinking about potential solutions, something to mull over.